Welcome to the third dimension. The General's People's Congress, Yemen's major political party, is marking its 43rd anniversary amid calls to end its fragmentation since the departure of its founder, the former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. While many observers thought that Saleh's departure would be the end of the GPC, some, however, assume that the party would survive because of its nationalistic values and broad base of popularity across the country. And despite the party's current fragmentation, its prominence remains unquestionable. Also, with the regional interests hinging on the survival of the GPC, the party still suffers a leadership crisis. Meanwhile, as Saleh's legacy and its GPC branch seem to have geared local and regional support to the party's advantage, observers wait to see how such a legacy will chart new paths to the party and to the country as a whole. To discuss this topic joins me from the United States, فرناندو Carvajal. Mr. Carvajal is a former United Nations expert in Yemen and a senior Yemen analyst. Fernando, good to have you in my show again.
Thank you, Doctor. Always a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Now, before we debate the current status of the GPC, Fernando, if I could ask you at the beginning, how would you assess Yemen's party system after the Houthis seized Sana'a in 2014?
Definitely a difficult question to tackle on a TV program, but I think something that you mentioned in your intro, the relevance of the GPC, if we focus on its ideology, on its mission, I think it's not only difficult to sustain at the moment, but difficult to replicate. Yeah, definitely since the Houthis took over Sana'a in 2014, there's been an ongoing constitutional crisis. Really, when we've spoken before, I've mentioned the Islah and the GPC as the constitutional parties. Islah being more of a constitutional party because it exists outside cohesively. As you mentioned in the intro, the GPC is fragmented. You have leadership outside Yemen. You have leadership on both sides of the de facto border in Yemen, inside Yemen. And really, we cannot talk about constitutionality. The more we reflect on it, we really can't talk about constitutionality, even though no party has pushed for invalidating the constitution of the Republic of Yemen. We cannot say there's constitutional order in Sana'a, right? Because the Houthis remain as a rebellion, as an uprising, as a coup in Sana'a. There is no parliament in Sana'a. So the Houthis have basically dismantled the constitutional order for the political system. In the southern portions, in the liberated area, we can no longer speak of constitutionality because the Presidential Leadership Council exists outside of the Constitution. There is no clause in the Constitution that would allow a presidential council since Hadi stepped down. So definitely a major crisis in Yemen is definitely the fragmentation, the lack of constitutional support for the political party system.
Yeah, okay. Now, if we may narrow down the debate on the GPC as the main political party in Yemen is marking its 43rd anniversary in August, Fernando. Now, many people said that the GPC, or they thought that the GPC would die after the departure of Ali Abdullah Saleh. But at the same time, okay, some other observers assume that the GPC still has this political weight across Yemen, despite the current fragmentation that is undergoing. How do you comment on this, Fernando?
I will tell you something. In January 2018, while I still worked at the UN panel of experts, this came up very often during my interviews as I traveled in Europe, the Middle East, meeting Yemenis. As you mentioned, the hope was that the party would die off because a lot of political figures, a lot of parties wanted to take advantage of Saleh having been the central figure for so long. And I think we discussed this last year as well, that without the head of the party, the charismatic head of the political party, the party would die off. But to your comment about how it survived, nobody has done anything, and we're talking about the political landscape in Yemen, to kill off the المؤتمر, the GPC. So we were in 2018, 2019, we were in a place where Yemeni politicians were just hoping the party would die off, the infighting would kill the party, but they themselves didn't move to kill the party. And we've talked about this before, where we talk about Amman, Cairo, UAE, Sana'a factions, Riyadh factions of the GPC.
Yeah.
Since Saleh died, no one has stepped up. No one has been allowed to step up. If we look at Riyadh, President Hadi never stepped up and took over the political party. If we look now at Dr. Rashad al-Alimi, he has not moved toward consolidating his role, and he was a loyal GPC member his entire political career. And he has failed to move forward and create an environment that would allow him to consolidate his influence within the GPC, allow it to unite. And if we look at Sana'a, just recently in the last month, the Houthis have continued to escalate their co-opting of the leadership in Sana'a, where literally we can no longer say that there's a GPC in Sana'a, whether it's Abu Ras or other people that from the GPC that were left behind from the legacy in Sana'a. We can no longer say that there's a leadership because, number one, the Houthis have marginalized them. Basically, we can say they're on house arrest, and Houthi members, Beit al-Houthi, as well as their subordinates, have moved into the GPC to co-opt its structure. And we'll get into it later, but lifting the sanctions from Ahmed and Saleh have definitely, over the last year, since July of last year, 2024, we have not seen any movement as well.
Yeah, okay. Now, again, in the same line, we have seen recently a kind of regional support to the GPC, a real interest to bring the GPC to the Yemen's political landscape. And perhaps it would be reasonable if I remind you here, Fernando, that the recent documentary released by Al-Arabiya TV, The Last Battle, now believe it or not, how could that documentary evoke such sentiments among people, okay? And that memory of Ali Abdullah Saleh as a symbolic leader for Yemen there, I will not just explain how many writers in Yemen have just talked about it, whether they liked or disliked Saleh, okay? Now, the question is, why do you think Riyadh and Abu Dhabi see the GPC as a real partner to regain the state from the Houthis?
Right. I mean, part of it is the legacy. The other part is, let's be honest, there is nobody that they can rely on for the project. If the project is unity, if the project is to retain unity, they have no partner. The partnership between the Emirates and the Southern Council, it's something that's going to last a long time because of mutually shared interest. This is, in keeping the Houthis away, in creating a new order. The timing of this documentary is definitely interesting. We talked about, you and I talked about this right before when it came out. It's definitely interesting, and it's extremely interesting that Al Arabiya would publish this, would create this documentary, and that they would publish it. That is the very interesting issue here when we talk about the documentary, because Saudi Arabia would be looked at as trying to flirt once again with al-Mu'tamar, with the GPC. And let's keep in mind that Saudi has tried to court Ahmed Ali for years, not just since before Ali Abdullah Saleh was killed. Saudi has tried to court Ahmed Ali toward their side, and there's been some resistance because, well, very smartly, Ahmed Ali doesn't want to jump into the chaos without having a plan. Yeah. And so the whole timing of it, let's keep in mind that the documentary also comes weeks after the U.S. president halted the month-long airstrikes against the Houthis and weakened the Houthis, but we are seeing the resurgence of Houthi threats and strikes along the Red Sea. Yeah. The visit of the U.S. president to Riyadh and the Gulf. So it's very interesting timing. I don't, as well, if I may, and we can discuss this later, keep in mind that this also comes as there have been a couple of campaigns since December of last year to push for reform of the Presidential Council. Yeah. So we can also see it in this timeline, where there's a push to restructure the Presidential Leadership Council. There's a push to bring back Ahmed Ali. And now it may be the work within the next 3 to 6 months along this line, and we can expect maybe some movement by the end of this year.
Okay. So talking about regional support brings us also to international support to the GPC. And here specifically, I will talk about the U.S. support to the GPC. Now, in your opinion, as senior Yemen expert, Fernando, does the current U.S. foreign policy share the region in the need to have the GPC back in Yemen's political life?
It's sort of difficult to answer because let's keep in mind that the U.S. doesn't have a sitting ambassador to Yemen today. So the Chargé d'Affaires is the one handling it. The former U.S. ambassador was appointed. So this administration is very difficult to figure out because their whole thing is unpredictability. I think even though Tariq is not the GPC, he exists outside the GPC. He's still the family, right? So when you yourself bring up the role of the family, Tariq is the military side at the moment. And so definitely what we saw last month with the capture of the Houthi Iranian armament off the coast of the Red Sea, where all the credit by CENTCOM, by you.
And the statement of praise from the CENTCOM on that interception,
Right. So this boosted Tariq for sure and his role, but to say that the U.S. would, back the GPC, or that this means that the U.S. has committed to a GPC as part of the solution, again, it could just be part of this push to move forward with a reform of the Presidential Leadership Council. Let's keep in mind that at the moment, we can see Tariq and the SDC as major players within any reform movement of the Presidential Council. It might be too early to say out loud, but there are 2 or 3 leaders within the Presidential Leadership Council who may have outlived their role. And this could be the beginning of a move toward that reform that could exclude some of the present members and bring in a new, not just new members, but a new structure.
I see. Okay. Now, talking about regional interest in bringing back the GPC to the political landscape as well as the international interest. Okay. Now, if I just stick it to Saleh's legacy here, how can they capitalize on this regional and international interest, okay, to revive their own chances?
Without leadership, without central leadership, there is no way you're going to revive the GPC. This is the main fault. We talked about this last year. We talked about this, the lack of a central figure, a charismatic statesman, military leader. You cannot have a new GPC. We cannot talk about a new GPC. We've seen, again, Dr. Al-Alimi has failed to bring in. We've seen Barakani fail to bring in the leadership. We've seen other junior party members like Hafid Moayed and Al-Izi not being able to position themselves within the political party in public, whether it's Cairo, Amman, or Aden. I mean, the GPC really doesn't exist in Aden, let's be honest, right? GPC doesn't exist in Aden. At the moment, it cannot exist beyond Tariq's presence. The GPC represents unity, unification. And the Houthis cannot accept that because they want the chair, they want to be on the throne. And Islah cannot accept it either because they want a bigger share of the pie. And so it is very difficult if we don't see the construction of a persona, the building up of a central leadership, whether it's a person or a group. I mean, who would be the president? Who would be the vice president? Who would be the secretary general of a unified GPC that can motivate hope across the Houthi territory? So let's just focus on the 20 million in the north. What leadership, what would it look like to motivate 20 million Yemenis in the north under the Houthis in order to generate hope of a resistance, of change that can then filter out beyond Sana'a, beyond the northern territories?
Okay. Now, if we just move a little bit from the GPC, okay, to the wider picture, which is Yemen's political or Yemen's peace process deadlock. Now, every single month we hear briefing from the UN envoy, and as we speak now, he is also giving a briefing to the United Nations Security Council, فرناندو. Okay, what else other than briefings, okay, the United Nations has provided Yemen with?
This is, you know me very well, and this is my point where I just go off on criticism. I've said since December, after Trump won the election here in the US, that the UN would be completely marginalized. Let's not forget that when Trump was in Riyadh, he only mentioned Yemen once, and it was to reference his great, beautiful ceasefire with the Houthis, right? There was no room for the UN. He did not meet any other Yemeni leader in Riyadh or in Abu Dhabi. And so we know that Yemen is not a priority beyond the strikes from the Red Sea. There is no money. The US and the Europeans are not going to give the UN any more money. The UN Special Envoy, it's really the last 6 months, he's been up against the wall and again has shown, and I know I'm going to get in hot water here, but again he has shown the lack of creativity because he has done absolutely nothing to re-inject the UN into the peace process. Let's remember that in between the ceasefire and the restarting, the UN envoy was in Aden. And within 24, I think, within 48 hours is when the Houthis relaunched their strikes and their threats along the Red Sea. That goes to show how irrelevant the UN is today. We just saw a speech by the Yemen's ambassador to the UN, I believe it was yesterday,
Yeah.
And so the UN has completely been marginalized, and it cannot be the role of the UN, whether it's under the current UN envoy or a new UN envoy. Let's keep in mind that I believe Hans Grundberg will be the longest serving UN envoy since Ben Omar. So whether it's a new UN envoy that's named this year or he continues, the UN role can only be revived when Saudi Arabia begins to work with the Houthis toward negotiations. Saudi Arabia will eventually need the legitimacy of the UN brokered deal, just like they did in April 2022, right before the announcement of the Political Leadership Council. But I don't believe the UN will have a role this year under the current UN Special Envoy unless Saudi Arabia decides to move toward re-engaging the Houthis in some peace plan. And I don't believe that that can happen until the Presidential Leadership Council will be reformed. So again, it's not something that we'll see in 3 months, maybe not even in 6 months.
Okay. Now, a final point, if you may, Fernando. Within these all developments, how do you see, number one, the future of the GPC, especially many people talk about very increasing developments to happen soon, okay? And also the prospects of peace in Yemen. One thing for the GPC and the other for Yemen's peace process.
I think right before we went on to our chat, you brought up the wedding yesterday, Monday, the 11th August in Cairo, one of Ali Abdullah Saleh's sons, and you brought up the fact that a lot of people from different political parties, not just the GPC, from elsewhere, but from the legitimate government and from other political parties were present.
True.
You know, I've been in a lot of these weddings, and a lot of these kachus, and politics never stops in Yemen.
Yeah.
Politics is always discussed everywhere. 2-3 Yemenis gather. And so we can only hope that yesterday's gathering from the Lahmars to Riyadh GPC to the family begins to work those wheels toward some deal that that begins to reform the PLC, that begins to work, unite the forces against the Houthis. We have to keep in mind that the Riyadh Agreement of 2019 has failed beyond holding on to the Presidential Leadership Council.
Yes.
The Riyadh Agreement has failed to deliver a cohesive military force that can push the Houthis out of Marib, out of Al-Bayda, or out of Tehama.
True.
And so gatherings like yesterday's at the wedding could bring some hope that these figures, these legacy political figures, are beginning to gather and talking about doing something against the Houthis. But again, without any cohesive leadership, without any political structure, there is very little hope that the GPC could come up as a challenging political party to anybody. And there are political forces within the legitimate government that are halting that because the GPC would be outside of their hands. As far as Yemen goes, let's keep in mind that we are about a month away from the start of the UN General Assembly for the new UN General Assembly starts toward the end of September. Yes. And you're going to start seeing the same thing as last year. Shuttle diplomacy, everybody meeting all these ambassadors traveling back and forth. But don't get excited. Again, just like last year, the Europeans, their hands are tied because of the Trump tariff issue, politics, Ukraine. And unfortunately, what's going on in Hadramaut, it's alarming because that could escalate very quickly and spread into Mahra and Shabwa. Yeah. And the coalition, the Saudi coalition, has really made a lot of mistakes in trying to handle that. Yeah. And Islah and other political parties, other military forces could take advantage of that chaos in order to try to jockey for a new position.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a very rough 2 months, I believe.
Yeah.
And like I said, the only hope is the move by Saudi to push Yemenis to reform the Presidential Leadership Council.
Yeah.
And then for Saudi Arabia to be honest and focused on re-engaging the Houthis in de-escalating and bringing them to the table by the end of 2025.
Okay. With this, we come to the end of this interview, Fernando. Thank you so much for your time and insight, and thank you for talking to Yemen Today TV.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
That's all for this week. See you next time with a new edition of The Third Dimension.